Petworking is presented by Maya Strategy Group, a leading market research and strategy consulting firm, helping clients in the pet care and animal health industries navigate strategic challenges for almost 2 decades. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Petworking. I'm Peter Kenseth, Vice President and Partner at Maya Strategy Group, and very excited to bring you a great episode today with a longtime veteran of the pet food industry and the human food industry. We have Greg Kean, VP of Advanced Innovation and Nutrition at Wellness Pet Company. Wellness is a household name in the pet food space. We last year had Jim Scott the third on the program, and his father, Jim Scott, founded Wellness, and the company's roots date back with the old Mother Hubbard brand over 100 years. So very exciting to have Greg join us today. Greg has been at Wellness for 22 years in a VP of innovation and advanced innovation capacity. Prior to joining Wellness, he worked on the human food side of things, looking, amazingly enough, 20 years ago, looking at meat analogs and dairy analogs for a organic, plant-based human food company. So he brings a lot of experience, both from the human food side of the spectrum in terms of innovation and consumer advocacy, consumer experience, as well as pet food nutrition, and that is where the bulk of his expertise lies. Greg, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to Petworking.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peter.
Greg and I had a chance to meet at, well, we didn't technically meet, I think, at the Pet Sustainability Conference, but roundabout, through networking and the Pet Sustainability Coalition and the Impact Unleashed Conference, we had a chance to meet up last year, and have subsequently, it's become one of my favorite parts of Global Pet and Super Zoo is swinging by the Wellness booth and checking in with Greg, comparing notes, and talking about what we see that's new and innovative on the show floor, and what's coming down the pipeline from an industry perspective. And Greg, I know this year at Global Pet, we were talking, you were mentioning, one of the big initiatives that you've got going on at Wellness right now is AAFCO testing. And, I think it's interesting for a lot of people, AAFCO, for those of you who are unaware, is the body that regulates the nutritional standards for pet food. And most brands will say that their formulas are AAFCO certified. And that is a self-verification standard that they hold themselves to. But what you're doing is actually submitting product to AAFCO for testing and validation. Is that correct?
For the most part, Peter. So generally, what when you label your product, you formulate your product to meet AAFCO nutrient profiles for a particular life stage for cat, dog, growth, maintenance, gestation, lactation, and you could put a product out in the market by simply meeting the nutrient requirements of that particular species in life stage. You are not required to then submit your products for a long-term feeding study. So if it's growth, it's 10 weeks for kittens and puppies. And if it's a maintenance study that you want to fulfill, then it's 26 weeks. No, that's not required. And you don't submit it to AAFCO. You do this on your own, and you have the substantiation. As a brand, you don't. They're not a regulatory authority per se, where you have to get them to review your results and approve them. They're actually signed off and approved by a licensed veterinarian at the kennel facility who does the AAFCO testing. But during that testing, the animals are fed during that period, and they're looking at complete blood chemistry. They're looking at their weight gain. There's a number of details that they manage over the course of that either 10 or 26 weeks to ensure that diet on a long-term feeding basis is delivering nutrition to sustain that animal in a healthy way. They're expensive, and they take time, and it's a multi-year project depending on how many diets you have in your portfolio. But for us, it was really important. We know we have great nutrition on paper, and we have a lot of research that we've done over the years through stool digestibility testing, nutrient profile testing, that gives us that confidence. But we thought it was really important to really give ourselves that extra confidence that as we talk about wellness as a brand and what it delivers to consumers, that we are doing our homework to the absolute best of our ability to ensure that.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned when we were talking about it, you said it wasn't inexpensive. I think the figures you referenced at Global Pet, you said it's costing wellness somewhere on the order of $3 to $4 million, and you're putting the entire portfolio of your diets through these tests.
Yeah, it's a multi-year project. So as we go through our portfolio, the cost is, in total, in terms of resources, time, testing, and before we actually go into a long-term feeding study, if we're running a 26-week study, and it's going to be, somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 to run that study. We want to ensure that we meet a number of prerequisites before we go into that 26-week study. So we're going to do, if it's a cat diet, we're going to ensure the urine pH is where we think it should be. We're going to do digestibility testing, and then palatability testing, just to ensure that the animals in that environment are going to eat it. So there's a lot of, before you even get to that AAFCO study, there's a lot of pre-work that we do in order to ensure that we're putting really the best diet into that study before we invest that type of money.
Makes sense. Now, you mentioned that, you can formulate your diet to meet AAFCO guidelines for growth, for maintenance, for breed, age, and as long as you are formulating it to those specifications, you don't have to undergo these tests. You don't have to, subject yourself to the 26-week trial, to, a $50,000 per diet expense. I'm guessing that's how you get up to the 3-4 million when you look at all the products that you have in your portfolio at Wellness. What's the big advantage? Is there a labeling? Is there a seal that you get to put on your bags, undergo these tests? Is there something that you can, that consumers can look for on the label to know that this testing has been done and that it's been independently verified by a third-party kennel lab? Or talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so on the back of the bag, there's a number of things that are required on your label. Your ingredient statement, your guaranteed analysis. Then there's an AAFCO substantiation statement. This is where you would say this product was formulated to meet the AAFCO nutrient profiles for that particular species and life stage. You can also choose to say this product has been substantiated using AAFCO feeding protocols for that species and life stage. At this point, it's actually interesting. We're choosing not to put that on our packaging, but it is something that we will be communicating more so to the trade and to the veterinary community as we talk about our products. We may at some point in the future decide to put that on our packaging, and there's not really any reason that we're not doing that today. We just feel that statement requires a little bit more education and support. That is something that is a better conversation for the veterinary community than necessarily the consumer community at this point.
Sure. And you also would probably have to redo all your packaging. So if we undertake that expense there, you probably will make sure that it's something that's going to resonate with the consumer and that you're going to get benefit from.
Exactly. we do that on a cycle anyway with updates. But again, we just feel like it's a conversation that is better understood with veterinarians than consumers at this point. That may change over time with education.
Yeah. And so, in thinking about that, I think that's one of the big things I saw, at Global Pet this year is that, there's a lot of movement towards, from OTC or, well diets, towards targeting the veterinarian as a source of recommendation and a means of gaining buy-in and gaining access to the consumer. I know you mentioned it as part of this testing and how that's going to inform your strategy of, hopefully getting more recommendations from veterinarians. We heard, I think Greenies is going to be, they're going to take their new diet and distribute it through the vet channel. So it will actually be sold in clinic. So definitely, there's this sense that, maybe you're not a Hills or a Purina or a Royal Canin therapeutic diet, but, or even a Hills, Purina, Royal Canin well diet. But there seems to be an effort, for other brands to get into the veterinary space and gain that recommendation, or, I think you put it as when we were talking, at least not lose customers because the vet isn't behind your product. Can you talk to us a little bit about that strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say there was a couple inflection points just over my career where I saw, and I think the industry witnessed, that there was sort of a break in that sort of social contract between pet food brands and consumers. The first was around the melamine recall in 2007, which I think jolted many consumers and educated veterinarians to. There's aspects of the supply chain and formulation and manufacturing that requires a little bit more transparency, quite honestly, on the part of brands. And when I think about that, the veterinarian and their interaction with the consumer, trust is just a significant part of that. They don't get to spend, maybe there's 1-2 visits a year with the consumer, and it's a really important touch point between the vet and the pet owner. And the vet needs to feel good that if they get questions from a pet owner, that they are making a recommendation that is in the best interest of their pet and their pet's health span, really. And I'd say that second inflection point was around DCM and how that kind of changed perceptions around brands that have really done their homework, have a legacy of really understanding everything from their ingredients, the nutrient content in those ingredients, and how they're assembled and put together for cat food, dog food, and what kind of health outcomes those produce. And if I were just put myself in a veterinarian shoes, I want to be able to rely on brands that have some proof points that suggest that they've done their homework. And therefore, if I'm going to make a recommendation to a consumer, or a consumer says I feed wellness, for instance, that they're gonna get an affirmative reaction as a result of that. And that trust component is really important. And for us, again, the testing is a validation that it's another data point for us that yes, what we assembled here, what we thought was a great diet, based on natural ingredients, is delivering the outcomes on a long-term basis for the pet.
Yeah. I think it's a great point. When we think about, veterinarians and making nutrition recommendations, it's something that a lot of vets don't get in vet school. The pet nutrition, shockingly, is a very small part of the vet school curriculum. I think in terms of being a board certified veterinary nutritionist, there's something like 200 or less in the United States.
I think less.
So, you know, for a lot of them, they are relying on the brands to do that work. And you know, it was interesting. I recently had Dr. Greg Aldrich on from Nulo, and he made the point that, you know, from a nutrition research perspective, if we think about companion animals, because there is no federal funding that is directed towards companion animal nutrition research, we're still about 50 years behind human nutrition or even livestock nutrition, because those get federal funding, you know, through the National Health Foundation, National Institute of Health. You're not getting that for companion animal research. So all the advances that are being made are being back of the industry. And, you know, you look at what you're doing now, you're self-funding $3 to $4 million of testing to prove that you've got a product that meets the current AAFCO guidelines, you know, by putting it through the AAFCO feeding protocol testing. But those AAFCO guidelines, you know, are largely industry, you know, are the result of research that has been done by the industry. It's not a nationally funded body.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good peer-reviewed literature that feeds into whether it's the NRC requirements that inform the AAFCO nutrient requirements. But it's, you know, Dr. Aldrich is absolutely right. I mean, there's a lack of funding in this space for companion animal nutrition. I will say that in the past few years, I've seen a ramp up of more research in this space. You know, I have a monthly we call it literature club, maybe, discussion with two board certified vet nutritionists and as well as the PhD animal nutritionist that we informs every decision we make in terms of nutrition. And we review with the two board certified vet nutritionists one, maybe two journal articles that was recently published. And, you know, we spend an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe on one article. And that's just one of probably 5 or 6 that we could review every month. So there is more coming out. It's just over the last 50 years. I mean, he's absolutely right. There's more catching up to do at this point.
And it's the industry that's, you know, taking it on its back. Like, I completely agree. You know, we see, we had Dr. James Templeman on from Primal back a few months ago, and I think they've just put out at least 2, and I think they have a 3rd coming in the Journal of Animal Science on, you know, the benefits of a, you know, freeze-dried versus raw versus extruded kibble, and nutrient absorption and bioavailability. I'm not trying in any way to minimize the strides that are being made. I'm just pointing out that, you know, it has, I think, historically been an overlooked, you know, piece of the industry, both on the vet side in terms of we're not educating all of our veterinarians well enough about companion animal nutrition. And, you know, we ask our vets to do a lot. I'm not saying, you know, that there's an easy fix for that. But to your point, if I'm a vet, I'm going to, you know, and I'm going to make that recommendation, and I don't have, you know, a background in being a board certified veterinary nutritionist, I'm probably going to rely on, you know, the brands that have done the testing, that, you know, have engaged in the research, and, you know, so you don't get blindsided by, you know, something like a DCM. And, you know, I'm always curious with DCM because I'm not a scientist, but I remember when that study came out, looking at it, and it was a sample of something on the order of 500 dogs, maybe a little less. There seemed to be pretty clear ties to the brands that where DCM was found, and it wasn't just, you know, grain-free brands. It wasn't all grain-free brands. It was some. Um, do you feel like that was my perception has been that that was kind of a gross overreaction um, to a certain extent? Would you agree?
It feels like it was not studied enough. It was premature in terms of the actions that were taken from a public disclosure standpoint. I think a lot of brands would say they feel the same way. They would have liked to have seen a little bit more diligence done before that happened. That said, I would say I always look for like what's the benefit of something that we feel is maybe not right in terms of the disclosure and its timing without more information. One thing that I have seen as a result are more brands are investing more time in testing on their own, understanding their diets more. And we know this because as we use a lot of these kennels where we do a lot of this testing, they are a lot busier since DCM than they were previous to it. And for that, I would say wasn't maybe a great scenario in terms of how it went down, but as a pet parent and somebody who wants to feel confident in not just our brand, but all the brands that are on the market, I like that I like that brands are spending more time and investing more in understanding their ingredients of their diets.
Definitely, definitely. You know, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we all want to make sure that, you know, whether we're getting the recommendation from our veterinarian or we're getting the recommendation from our local independent pet store or from Petco or PetSmart or, you know, wherever you acquire your pet food, that what you're giving your pet is contributing to a better quality of life for it, and, you know, hopefully keeping them happy, healthy. You know, you can see a level of enjoyment when you give them their food every day. You know, I think that's what everybody's looking for as a pet parent. But, you know, there is that other side of it. You've got to make sure that it's safe, and, you know, that it's nutritionally appropriate. You make reference to a lot of these kennels where you do the testing. I know we've talked to folks from Mars and from Hills and Purina and a lot of the bigger companies. You know, I think Hills in particular, they're really well known for the pet nutrition center, and, you know, they have over 1,000 dogs there that are, you know, they're their dogs. Obviously, that's a big financial undertaking. So, talk to us a little bit about, you know, these kennels, and I'm assuming that means that at Wellness, you guys do not have a pet nutrition center that you're using. Talk to us a little bit about, you know, how you go about testing, and what are like the minimum levels of testing that, you know, that the consumer can expect that brands are undertaking.
Sure.
So their pets are being kept safe.
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are a couple kennels that you know, are in our approved network of kennels, and what does that mean? It means that they have policies and procedures around everything from animal welfare to you know, how they report the data and the level of veterinary oversight for the animal's health and well-being while they're at these kennels. Most of the dogs and cats are actually adopted out over a period of time, which is really great. But we very much care that the kennels we're working with are in alignment with our values, and, you know, that means that the animals are treated, have social time, and that's really important to us. But from a minimum requirement, listen, I'll speak for ourselves, and you know, this is certainly not a soapbox type of response. This is just what we believe is really important before we put a diet on the market. So if it's a dog food, we want to know that from a nutrient profile standpoint, we're meeting all of the requirements or exceeding them. in many cases, just from a pure nutrient profile standpoint. And that has a certain cost and time and so on associated with it. But that gives us confidence that, all right, the base nutrition is really solid. What we care really most about after that is the digestibility. So the food that is consumed, how much is actually utilized for that animal's benefit from a caloric standpoint. Within the scope of that digestibility study, we also get stool performance. So, a consumer may not necessarily know that they're worried about digestibility, but they're absolutely going to understand if that dog's stools are good or not. When you're picking them up every day, once a day, maybe twice a day, you live in a city, wherever you may be, you want that stool to be a healthy stool. And that's also an indicator for a lot of consumers of the health of an animal. If things go south there, usually that's when we're calling the vet. If there's all of a sudden, very loose stools for a couple days or diarrhea. So we want to make sure the diet performs from the digestibility and stool standpoint. I'm a little bit less concerned about palatability for dogs. I know that may sound blasphemous in some circles, but in general, what we have seen when we feed dogs, I'm always looking at, what is the metabolic requirements of that dog. So we know the dog's body weight, we know how many calories they need. The kennel is able to tell us that. So then for each of the dog in that palatability study, we are looking for acceptance, but I'm measuring acceptance as a % of caloric requirements for that pet. And that's kind of the last thing box we check for dog diets. For cat diets, it's much of the same. Obviously, palatability has a greater sort of meaning when you're launching a cat food. So we look at both % calories required versus consumed, but then we also look at a hedonic measure. And this is really a scoring system around the cat's enthusiasm as they both approach the bowl, which is on a 0 to 3 scale, 3 being the best, and then eating enthusiasm. Are they kind of looking at the food, walking away? That'd be a 0, all the way to, they are absolutely, chowing the food down, and that would be a 5. And we are able to give a sort of a quantitative score to a hedonic measure. And this is all done by observation at the kennel as they watch the cats feed, which is a really cool program we added about a year and a half ago, and has been really helpful to us, because in the end, this is what the consumer is going to see. They're not thinking calorie, % calories consumed versus metabolic needs. They're really thinking, when I put the food down, does the cat like it or not? It's that simple.
And so when you say, you're less concerned with the palatability from a dog's perspective, I mean, I'm a dog owner, and I know, like, if I don't switch up Peenie's bowl, and I don't do kind of a rotational diet, she gets bored. And, if I feed her the same thing again and again and again, I'm not switching toppers and things, that level of excitement diminishes. Whereas if every mealtime is something new for her, or at least kind of switching back and forth as she's gotten older. When she was younger, she'd eat anything, but as she's gotten older, it's become more of a, she needs that wet topper. And is the rationale behind that? You think dogs are just less selective in general? I mean, I know cats are pickier eaters than dogs in general, but do you have that hedonic measure for dogs as well, or?
We've not done that yet. And, I'm generalizing a little bit when I say dog. So we do care a little bit more, certain small breeds have that wear out sort of feature. And I have 2 dogs that are both small breed. One of them is in the same camp as yours. She's also a little bit older, and it's interesting. We've seen this pattern a little bit more as she's gotten older, certainly. And then older dogs, palatability does become, as we've witnessed, certainly with consumer feedback, even a little bit more important. Their appetite may decrease a little bit. So Is that because there maybe their gums and teeth, or it actually is there some sort of pain, associated with eating if the dog hasn't taken care of, if the teeth have not been taken care of throughout their life? We've heard that some dogs have a lot less teeth. They've been extracted, pulled, so it's actually more difficult to eat, and or painful. So feeding a softer food or mixing in a softer food into the kibble to sort of moisten it up is important. So I don't want to represent that we don't care about it at all. It's just that in general, in a kennel environment, we have not yet come to cross the paths with a diet that wasn't consumed completely based on the animal's caloric need. It just, the dogs seem to be way more forgiving on that side than the cats, where we've experienced a number of data points where we've been surprised. Wow, the cat didn't like that. That's shocking based on the recipe, and we make changes, and then the cats accept it readily. We've just experienced palatability ups and downs much more on the cat side. Then the last on the cat side, which is critical to us cat owners and veterinarians, is measuring the urine pH and specific gravity of the cats when they feed our food. So that's a prerequisite as well for us, and that's table stakes when we launch a cat diet, that we conduct urine pH testing. We generally want to be in the 6.1 to no greater than 6.5, 6.6 range, and we like the specific gravity to be below a certain target, just to ensure that animal is not going to have any kind of issue from a crystal formation standpoint.
All right. And then on top of all this, you're doing the AAFCO feeding guidelines testing for all your diets to sort of revalidate, on top of all these minimum levels that you're going to go through before you put anything even out.
Correct. And one clarification on because we have a lot of diets. The way AAFCO has it organized is let's say you have a parent diet. So you organize the diet based on whether it's, we have an organization to our diets, whether it's grain free, based on protein, GA level, and to some degree the architecture of the diet based on fiber level. Some other things will dictate whether it's a family, if it's a puppy diet or kitten diet, that is its own family as well. And you organize your diet. So there may be 5 or 6 diets that fall into one family. So we have a number of families. Those families are what we test. And that one diet may represents generally anywhere from 6 to 8 diets in that family, the way we have them organized.
Would that be, if you had like different formulations, like a beef versus a seafood flavor, and
we would treat those. We would treat those separately.
So each flavor would be tested for the given protein that you were using.
Correct. But if we have 4 or 5 dog foods that have generally around the same moisture, protein, fat, fiber, ash, the general macronutrient architecture, and it's all under one protein type, they may fall under one family. So there'd be a parent of those 5 or 6 diets that would represent, because we would assume, in the way AAFCO has it designed, the assumption is that if that diet passes, all these other diets being so similar will have the same results. What we've done as well is anything that is novel or new to us would also that would be mandatory that it goes through an AAFCO maintenance study. So about 3 years ago, we worked on a plant and egg based diet. So for us, this was our first sort of hybrid, mostly vegetarian diet with a small percentage of eggs. And we just felt as though it was so different from anything we had done before that it was just, before that diet launched, it was a requirement that we had to prove that it could go through a 26-week feeding trial for dogs before we release that to the market. So we have depending on the product, we may say, all right, it's only one product. It's a family on its own, but we still need to do the homework because it's new to us and kind of new to the pet food industry as well.
Be, the same for, a new ingredient type, if you got into, lab grown meat or, other meat. I know you just mentioned plant-based, but if you got into other alternative meats, that might necessitate it. What about food form? If you were launching, obviously something I'd love to touch on and it's on, you have raw, freeze dried, wet, kibble, there's so many different forms that consumers can choose from. If you were getting into a new form, even if it wasn't new to the industry, if it was new to you, if you wanted to launch a raw product, I'm guessing you'd go down those guidelines with AAFCO and do a maintenance study for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's new to us and not necessarily new to the industry, that would require us under our own internal, nutrition philosophy to go through that process. We need to feel comfortable if we're selling product and telling consumers, that it's healthy and completely balanced, that we need to stand behind it as a business. So a lot of this work is really proving it to ourselves first, and we just feel that's really important. It's hard to convince other people that we've done the right things if we can't sit here at the within the walls of wellness and be very comfortable that we've turned over essentially every stone before giving it to people's pets.
Makes sense. Greg, I wanted to get your take. Obviously you have 22 years of experience in innovation at Wellness. And I always value your take and your opinion on kind of what's next and what's the next trend. You mentioned dabbling in plant-based nutrition. We're seeing things like lab-grown meats and protein alternatives coming into the market. We were talking earlier about the science ramping up and the proliferation of papers and peer-reviewed research that's coming into the space. Part of that, has also focused on bioavailability and nutrient absorption and the food form. And I think one of the things we saw at Global Pet this year was there was a real villainization, so to speak, around high heat cooking methods, whether that be extruded kibble or canned food. People really seem to be embracing raw alternatives. There's a lot to cover there, so take it as you will. But what do you see as kind of the next big thing that we should expect to see in the industry over the next few years? What's your take on this sciencing up and bioavailability and nutrient absorption and low heat, high heat? Where do you stand?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. Certainly, I'll tackle the idea around processing and ultra processing. I spend probably as much time following human nutrition and science trends as I do pet. There's a lot of linkages, I believe, between the two. And there's no shortage of articles around ultra processing and the impact on human health. And we obviously know there's issues with influence on blood sugar and people's AC1 levels that are being measured and tracked, and there's continuous blood glucose monitors. There's a lot of attention on the human side on healthy eating less processed foods, and longevity, health span, and delaying the onset of chronic disease. So very, very critical. I think we have to be careful, though, in the pet space not to confuse things like potato chips or, cookies or things that are highly processed that have no nutritive value, the empty calories, and haven't been produced in a way that are completely balanced with pet foods, which have, quite honestly, even though it's been more company researched, for the most part, there's a lot of data suggesting that pet food is healthy when formulated the correct way. So right now, I think there's a huge influence, more so on the marketing around that language of minimal processing, and there's not really a body of data or science to support whether something that is less processed, formulated perfectly, is healthier than something that is necessarily, let's say, extruded at this point. So I think going forward, I would love to see, and I'd love to even participate in research that gets to, understanding those questions in a deeper way. In the meantime, we'll see a lot of language, come out around purporting the benefits of less processing, but it won't be supported by science at this point. I think it's the obligation of pet food companies that, as we say these things, that we have some data and evidence to show that those things are true. And I think that science and research some of it has already started to be generated, and I think there'll be more of that coming. And I think it'll be really beneficial to formulators, food engineers, in understanding how do we then formulate, what is a truly healthy diet going forward. I think on the market today, there are very truly healthy diets, and we formulated a number of them. And I know other brands have as well. And we could prove that with our data. I think more science is needed in that space.
I know Dr. Templeman's papers seem to indicate that there was an advantage to freeze dried or raw versus extruded, but that's one set of peer reviewed research. And I know saying when they launched their kibble on the raw product that came out, I think, a little bit before Global Pet, but Global Pet was kind of the big debut. That was one of the diets that was in those studies, and it tested really well. That being said, when we look, the industry is still, although raw alternative was sort of the big trend at Global Pet, kibble has been the backbone of this industry for, since its and I don't think kibble is going anywhere, at least from a cost and convenience perspective. What's your take? A lot of the marketing out there kind of talks about, synthetic, vitamins and minerals versus naturally occurring vitamins and minerals. We see, the farmer's dog with ads, no living being should eat processed food for, every meal of its life. All marketing, or, is there any credence to that?
So, I don't know. I don't know for sure. At this point, we know the consumer behavior is 2/3 to 3/4 of consumers are regularly mixing in something into their kibble. So that kibble is the foundation, but share of meal, that bowl as a percentage of kibble is being decreased in favor of things that add taste, appeal, variety. For older dogs, certainly helps motivate that dog to finish their food, because obviously older dogs need to maintain a healthy lean body mass. So that's really important that they eat. But in general, consumers are wanting to add variety to their meal, and I think freeze-dried, toppers, raw, all these choices are fantastic from a consumer standpoint, and the consumer should have access to those. I think there are, health benefits, especially if you're trying to boost protein content, or some of these, a lot of the products that we have also have other functional benefits for the animal, and that adds a lot, from a consumer perspective. In terms of the health, again, I think we need to study that more. The one thing about kibble that, as I reflect and have been reflecting on is, I think it's I I think it's wonderful if you have the time and you have the financial wherewithal to feed um, some of these more expensive or forms that require a little bit more effort and work. But the truth is, owning a pet for me, and this is a little bit more of a social statement, owning a pet as a part of your family, no matter what socioeconomic status you fall into, to me is a really, really wonderful thing. If you're raising kids, to have a pet in the family, this shouldn't. If the only way to feed, complete and balanced, very nutritious diet is something that costs 15, or so dollars a day, whatever the cost may be, that somebody who is, has a less disposable income, shouldn't feel guilty about what they're feeding. And quite honestly, kibble has a long history of being a very healthful and nutritious food. So I think kibble is really a part of the vehicle to give access to pet ownership to really many loving families that should have a pet as part of their lives. And when I think about kibble, we have a social contract and responsibility with consumers that when they buy a bag of wellness, if it is in the kibble form, they should fully expect that product is fully safe and complete and balanced nutrition, and that's exactly what they're going to get. If they choose to buy, some of the other products in our topper ecosystem and bowl booster ecosystem to add to the kibble, then I think that's wonderful. If they choose to add that to their dog's bowl, it's fun to watch your dog, really get excited about mealtime. So I think all these products have a really, really strong place from a boosting standpoint in the pet industry to adjunct kibble. But to your point, kibble is still going to be, the most solid foundation in terms of how we feed at least dogs at this point. I know with cats it's a little bit different, where the feeding behavior is a little bit more centered around dry kibble in the day to graze, and feeding wet maybe at morning and night, which I think is a great routine from a hydration standpoint.
Yeah, that's a whole nother nutritional requirement on the cat side for sure. But no, I mean, I completely agree with you. It's, I think a lot of these food forms, unless you have a small dog or are, mass affluent, you are not, Peony's 70 pounds. I couldn't feed her exclusively freeze dried or raw if I wanted to. It's just cost, you start paying more to feed your dog than you do to feed your family. And,
Right.
And obviously she's a part of our family. She's well taken care of. And I think, most people would describe their dog or cat that way. But at the same time, you don't get a pet to add a financial burden to your life. You add it, to give the pet a good home, and to, make a positive addition to your family. So I think it's a great point you make about kibble and the as I said, the cost and convenience and the economic reality that a lot of people in this country face. And whether it's the cost of veterinary care or the cost of nutrition, I don't think we should be making pet ownership something that's exclusive to the upper class.
Yeah.
So no, I completely agree with you there. Greg, I know we're coming up on our time here, but I'd be very curious outside of that. I know you and I talked at at Global Pet about, the fact that the market, the pet food market is shrinking. There are less pet owning households. There are fewer dogs and cats in households in the United States now than there were at the height of the pandemic. And a lot of that, has to do with people going back to the office, unfortunately, surrendering pets that they adopted during the pandemic. But I think you said pet owning households has declined about by like 3 million since the height of the pandemic.
Yeah, those are some of the numbers we've seen on the dog side, certainly, and cat owning households have increased. I don't know the exact number, but that number has actually increased, especially amongst younger Gen Z pet owners.
So, getting back to that innovation question, then, if we're seeing a shrinking market, where do you see companies going? To acquire new customers, to take share from other companies, because if we're looking at a shrinking market, you're not necessarily, the opportunity to acquire new pet owning households isn't what it was a few years ago. You're now more in a situation where you're trying to take customers from some of your competitors. What do you see? Where's the race? What's the innovation engine going to focus on?
Sure. Well, I'll start with I'm an optimist in this area, so I believe we've sort of maybe had a little bit of a pause at this point. I do believe, just because having a pet in your house and in our lives is so important. I believe that will come back over time. I think the question is then, what will people be choosing to feed? How do you meet consumers? How do you meet consumers where they're at? And I think as we look at kibble and from an innovation standpoint, I think it's really, really critical to recognize that the trend of mixing and topping is here to stay and will continue to expand. So what do those forms look like? How do you offer whether it's more personalized benefits in terms of your pet's needs, whether it's a cat or a dog from a functional standpoint, or from a visual appeal and variety standpoint? How do you continue to offer products that deliver on those needs, but do it in a more affordable fashion? I think one of the things that we've seen as well is that educating consumers on some of these products is also a barrier. So there's an element of education, whether it's freeze dried. We take for granted, we're in the industry, we take for granted what raw, freeze dried, and we talk about processing steps, cold pressed, gently cooked. We know the process. We're kind of in our own, bubble to a degree. Consumers outside don't exactly know about these products or how to use them at this point. We speak to consumers a lot, and there's still a fair amount of people that will take some of their dinner, homemade dinner, and add a little bit of broccoli or a piece of their steak or something to their dog's bowl. That behavior has always been around and is happening. But when they see a product walk by a store shelf and they see freeze dried, some of the feedback we hear from consumers is like, is that astronaut food? Like, what is that? What does that even mean? So I think there's some education, probably some word of mouth, and between consumers that have had success with these products, more trial to sort of help with that education process. But I think there's still a gap, and there's a governor on how fast these products can grow, even things like fresh or raw, and in education and trial are really the gaps there. So I think innovation will be important to continue to work on these products and make them more accessible, more affordable, and so on. But I think I think we could throw more products into the market, but that's not necessarily going to result in them growing. What's going to result in growing is more awareness of the benefits and how you actually integrate them into your feeding regimen.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great point. And, as you were saying, I was thinking about it. I oftentimes will, try to offer recommendations to my friends around pet food and, at least from a food form type perspective. And, um, but I feel like one of the big things that I've noticed is that, and I'd be curious if your consumer research uh, has reached a similar conclusion. There's almost, because of the pet parent mentality, there's almost a degree of pridefulness in the choice that you've made as a pet parent on what to feed your dog or cat. That when somebody, you know, offers a suggestion of how you could be doing better, it's almost questioning your fitness as a pet parent, so to speak. And so people aren't always necessarily open to getting that, oh, you should try maybe adding some freeze dried to your kibble. I think there is that similar mentality of like, oh, well, you're not feeding Billy broccoli with every meal. Well, you should try doing that. Uh,
I think that's true. I think that's absolutely true. I know it's true with human parenting to
yeah,
to some degree as well. There has to be I think there generally has to be a tension that you're solving for somebody to be open. Um, again, if it's we did some research a few years ago with senior pet parents, and we did hear about the tension of, it makes consumers upset really when their dog doesn't eat. They put the bowl, down full of food, and it could be 2, 3 days, and then their dog finally eats it. Um, that creates anxiety, quite honestly. I know it in our house. It happens, and I have to remind my wife every summer that as soon as the weather sort of jumps up, has an inflection point up to 75, 80 degrees. One of our dogs eats 30% less. I mean, it's been 11 years now, and it's been the same pattern every summer. And this is probably not very novel and just happening in the Kean household, but it causes a tension for her, and she starts watching, and why is she not eating? And I explain it, and she kind of resets her pattern. Then the fall comes along, and then she starts eating again. But I think you almost need a tension before somebody is sort of willing to make a change to their routine. And that's maybe when they're more receptive to somebody's feedback. I do know that it's critical from a brand standpoint to have really good ratings and reviews online, because that is a source of information and recommendation for consumers. That's very important. So if you're not sitting there with a healthy star rating, for instance, and someone scans reviews and doesn't see a good experience with your product, then they're not going to trial it at that point.
or that independent shopping, that the reviews almost kind of serve. It's like a reverse consumer psychology, because people can feel that they discovered it themselves. That I went online and I looked and I did the research, and this is highly rated and seems to solve the problem that I'm having, or as opposed to kind of getting back to what we were talking about earlier, that questioning of parental fitness, whether it be human or pet, tends to be less well received. Yeah, and just maybe a final point here, Greg. I know you and I have talked. You mentioned the senior dogs a lot. The longevity and aging research kind of being the next frontier. Do you see, in the last year, we've seen leap years come out. We've seen Stepaws with their NAD supplement. I saw an article in Pet Food Processing earlier today with a new brand.
I saw that as well. I forget the name though.
Tura Agros. But yeah, there was another. It wasn't NAD based, but it was like a super multivitamin all-in-one supplement with some NAD precursor. But to me, that seems like we're going to be seeing more, and we have Loyal for Dogs seen on the therapeutic side. What do you see that being a thing? Is that going to make its way from supplements into food? I mean, I know, we have digestive supplements, but we also have, diets to promote digestive health. Do you think companies are going to start to work to get those longevity or aging support related claims into foods?
It's possible. I think just in terms of what you could say on pet food versus what you could say on a supplement is a lot different. So the regulatory discretion allows you to make claims or statements or representations that are probably a little bit more, legal but more liberal than what you can say on a package that would be considered a drug claim. So I think it depends on the ingredients. The area that I'm excited about and increasingly excited about are some of the postbiotics that have very specific functionality related to whether it's immunity or other functions in the animal system that seem to have some promise. And those ingredients have a much easier path from a regulatory standpoint to end up in food. The other piece of it too, which is really fascinating, is when you think about consumers and the types of products that you're looking to sell. If you're thinking about longevity, what we've heard from consumers is there's a bias towards greater believability if that ingredient is a supplement versus a food, because I think we kind of associate supplements with concentrations of things that have greater efficacy or likelihood of being effective. And food is medicine, in general when you think about it. But when you're talking about like a specific function like longevity, it's the believability factor, at least now, is greater in a supplement form versus a food form, which I think is really driven from the way we think about human supplements, that are very focused on, we take melatonin for sleep, vitamin D for bones and healthy bones and so on. So in immunity, so there's I think that relationship is really drawing mostly from the human interaction with supplements.
I think as a society, we do tend to be searching for that silver bullet magic pill kind of solution to the problem. And, if it was just available through food, then why didn't I discover this, years ago? Right. And, I think it is convenience in a way. Think about like MSM for your joint health. I mean, that's just bioavailable sulfur. If you ate enough peppers and green vegetables, you could get the quantity of MSM that you needed from a supplement, but you're probably not going to hit those levels. And
I think I love the area of health span and longevity personally. I have my own sort of regimen that I undertake, but I also realize to some degree I'm an experiment of one. I know there's other people that have different combinations of things they take, but I'd like to think the research I've done on the things that I take are going to play a role in the outcomes I'm looking for. I look at my blood chemistry every year, sometimes twice a year, to understand how I'm being affected. But when you're talking about pets or populations of pets, we want to be careful about experimentation there and really, really ensure that there's sound research behind some of these things. And I love the concept of NAD in pets, but to date, I know there's been some research in dogs, but the greatest body of research has been on organisms that are not dogs or humans. So I do feel like there's more research that's needed there. So I'm good. I'm okay experimenting on me. I'm less comfortable experimenting on other people's pets at this point. And I'd love to see more research, with some sound conclusions, on some of those ingredients. But we're not going to stop. I think the goal is to continue to make very, very healthy foods in whatever format that is, in supplements and toppers, that really deliver, the best outcomes for pets. That's our goal, but, we're going to do it in a way that's also probably slightly conservative, but absolutely look at some of these novel ingredients and the role they can play. Partner with, that's one of the things that, I love to do is to arrange some of the smartest people in these areas to really look at the research, look at the ingredients, understand if we're going to do some research, how would we set up the study design to give us the best results so that we can feel comfortable using an ingredient, a novel ingredient in our pet food or in a supplement form. But I think that homework piece, doing your homework, is absolutely imperative. And until we have more data and research, I think the most sound way to fall back on health, delaying onset of chronic disease and barring some genetic predisposition, ensuring that there is a healthy lifespan or health span, is to maintain a healthy body weight, get regular physical activity, as well for a pet and for humans. It's all those things as well as a good social belonging in your life. But maintaining healthy body weight is probably with a balanced diet is probably the best science is really around that we have today for humans and pets.
Exactly. And to kind of bring things full circle, that's why you guys engage in it is so important. It's proven, it's complete and balanced nutrition, and it's able to contribute to maintaining healthy body weight, amongst a number of other positive health factors. So
yeah, we have we have some really cool research that we'll be able to talk about next year on healthy weight diets in our products that we're really excited about.
That'll be cool. Well, I'm always up for a chat, and I'm sure we'll touch base on it at one of the conferences, and hopefully we can have you back on the show to talk about it once the research is published. Do you have a timeline for when we can expect that?
Not right now. We're still in the we need to process the diet. We're almost through our formulation and nutrition profile work right now. So it's hopefully next year is our goal, but I don't have an exact date at this point.
Well, it's going to be a whole new diet, not just research on your existing diets and how they contribute to healthy weight.
Yeah, it'll generally be a new diet, but they'll not let's call it more of a next generation of our current diet. It won't be dramatically different, but there'll be some a few different attributes around it.
Maybe we'll see it at Global Pet or potentially Super Zoo 2025.
Yeah, hopefully global. Yeah,
very cool. And we'll be seeing each other at Super Zoo later this summer.
Yeah, exactly.
Super Zoo 2024. So, and I'm sure we'll touch base before then. But Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to join. Always appreciate your insights and thoughts and commentary on where the industry is headed. Greg Kean, Vice President of Advanced Innovation and Nutrition at Wellness Pet Company, everyone. I'm Peter Kenseth, Vice President and Partner at Maya Strategy Group here with Petworking. And really appreciate y'all taking the time to listen today. And know that if you're in the pet food aisle at your local independent pet store, Petco, PetSmart, and you see a bag of wellness, you can be rest assured that it has been tested far above beyond what most products on the market today are undergoing, and product you can definitely feel good about feeding to your dog or cat. Greg, thanks again for walking us through all the good work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peter.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you again soon. Petworking is presented by Maya Strategy Group, a leading market research and strategy consulting firm, helping clients in the pet care and animal health industries navigate strategic challenges for almost 2 decades.